I participated in the GMTK Game Jam for 2022. Before I reveal the jam's theme, I did want to briefly bring attention to last year's jam, which I also participated in. That year's theme was
Joined Together.
And the submission was this: Cube Robots in Space. I think the title was referencing that One Face and Verb episode.
Space adventure, it's an adventure in space.
This game is a puzzle game with a simple premise. Navigate your cube robot and remove all the white tiles. The twist was there is another platform that is joined together with the first one, so you have to pay attention to which tiles are linked in order to succeed. This was my first ever game jam, and my first time ever really finishing a game. Honestly, I was, and still am, very proud of what I managed to create in just 48 hours. It just about slipped into the top 1,000 at place 996 out of over 5,000 entries, which is in the top 20%. Quite the accomplishment for a first try. But there's still room for improvement. Despite being very solid, the game wasn't that creative or ambitious, and it didn't apply the jam's theme in any particularly interesting way. These are all points I wanted to address for this year. Alright, so what was this year's theme?
Roll of the dice.
Thanks, Mark. By the way, check out GMTK, it's awesome. With the theme revealed, the first step is to start brainstorming ideas for the game I wanted to make. Now, don't undervalue the importance of this stage. It may be tempting to dive right in and start coding, but it's better in the long run to spend a few more hours coming up with and fleshing out a good idea than it is to waste a lot of time developing a bad idea. I've studied previous jams, and from what I've gathered, the games that do the best fall into one of two categories. A, look really beautiful or have a really unique art style. Yeah, I'm just gonna cross that one off now. Or B, are really fun and apply the jam's theme in a creative and interesting way. Yeah, that sounds more like me. As a bit of a beginner tip for coming up with creative ideas, I like to think about the consequences of introducing a restriction. For example, I chose to interpret this jam's theme as probability, and to make something in my game randomly determined. I also wanted to make some kind of dungeon crawler where you fight using weapons deployed from little capsules. Combining these ideas, I chose to make the weapons deployed from capsules randomly chosen. Now that's the basis, so what's the consequences of your weapons being random? Well, if they're random, even you don't know what you're gonna get. What if your weapons can harm yourself just as easy as the enemies? Now the game transforms from a simple dungeon crawler to a sort of bullet hell every time you decide to use a weapon. I really like this premise, so that's what I rolled with. With brainstorming done, it was time to start implementation. The first step is, well, to start a new project. Next we need some placeholder art, so I opened up Sprite and made some very impressive squares. Now before I do anything else, I want to enable a very important setting in Godot that I actually never hear anyone talk about and is pretty poorly documented. This setting will make sure the viewport scales when full screened. For player movement, after failing to implement it myself, I copied the code from one of my Ever projects. Given a quick test, everything feels smooth. Well, as smooth as pretty FPS can capture. Yeah, I forgot to change the frame rate when I recorded these clips, but I promise the final gameplay footage will be proper 60 FPS. The code for movement looks like this. Next we add some more colorful squares that will eventually become our enemies. Awesome, now let's kill them. I brainstormed a few weapon ideas and decided to implement the crossbomb first. This weapon will spawn a glowing region that after a few seconds will call all entities, player included, that are in it. After hooking up a camera, I added code so that the player can drop a capsule at their feet instead of just spawning the capsule at the beginning of the scene. Now it may not look like it from the progress, but it was starting to get late and I had been going for several hours now. So the last thing added on Friday was the ability to throw capsules as well as some particle effects for deaths. The capsule spawning code looks like this. Particles are achieved using Godot's particle system, which I've always found a little finicky, but I think this result is pretty decent. My goal by end of day was to produce a proof of concept where the core mechanics of the game are implemented, and I think I achieved that. But trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Rise and shine early Saturday morning, or at least it was supposed to be. I woke up at 7 AM but decided to play some Xenoblade for a while before resuming the jam. I didn't actually start working again until around 9. I'll admit I was having a bit of trouble getting motivated. Sure, my game was going alright, but I was struggling to picture its form and what it would become. I was starting to second guess myself. To remedy this, I have another beginner tip for game development. Now, it may be tempting to focus on the coding and worry about art and sound till later, as I have been doing so far, but this is a big mistake in the long run. Games are so much more than just code. In fact, they're a perfect unity of code, art, and music. So having some good art and sound effects early on can make a world of difference in not just how your game shapes together, but also how you stay motivated to work on it. So first thing Saturday morning, I took my own advice. I began making some dungeon art so you're not just running around in a void. My original idea was to make some biospheres so you could have like an Arctic room, a forest room, a desert room, but then I remembered I'm terrible at art, so I scaled it back. I ended up just making some basic red colored dungeon tiles that I will later expand to some other colors. After completing that, I imported the tile set into Godot and threw together a single room with proper collisions. Continuing on the aesthetics train, I wanted to do something with Godot's 2D lighting engine that I had never had a good chance to use before. I created some torch sprites with some cool particle effects and placed them on the walls. I added light occluders to the dungeon tiles and players so that they would cast shadows. Even though this does nothing for gameplay, I think it's a great addition. Next, I wanted to implement something I have always wanted to use in the game, screen shake. But of course I had no idea how to do that, so I found this great resource online. And with a bit of tweaking and some added sound effects, I think it turned out great. The sound effects themselves are actually pretty cool. It's actually just the same sound playing on a loop that gradually increases the volume and pitch, creating this really awesome urgency feel. Honestly, the whole screen shake system makes such a difference. Now let's turn enemies from squares into circles. Yes, the enemies are going to be slimes. I borrowed some wandering code from another project of mine, also featuring slimes. And with some little slime particles to leave in their wake, the slimes are looking pretty good. Lastly, let's replace the player character. Honestly, I struggled to get the animation right, but finally I think it's looking good. And with some added sound effects and footsteps, I'm quite happy with the result. Now before we move on, let's just take a moment to reflect on what has been done since this morning. I've added no new game mechanics, except for cyber movement I guess, so all the work has been entirely aesthetic. Bringing it back to what I said earlier, would you be more motivated to create new game mechanics for this game? Or this game? That, my friends, is the power of art and sound. Okay, let's not get too dramatic, there's still a ways to go. Next I expanded the single room into the full maze, although I use the term maze very loosely. It's basically 9 identical rooms connected by narrow passages. But I did assign each quadrant a different color. I achieved this by grayscaling the original tile set and applying a different color filter to each quadrant. Overall, I think it works well. The colorful maze pairs well with the slimes. The next task was to fix something I hadn't actually brought attention to yet. That is the capsules. Before they had no collisions, so they could simply just be thrown through walls. But now they will collide with both the tile set and slimes with the addition of a fun sound effect. Okay, now I have a bit of a confession. I've been putting something off, which has literally been my mechanic the entire game, for weapons. I've been a bit intimidated to work on more of them, but no more. It's time to procrastinate longer by improving the existing one. I have still been using the placeholder art for the X-Bomb, so my first task was to make a slightly better sprite, although my first attempt was maybe a bit too large. After scaling down and changing its color to black, I think it's looking better. I also updated the capsule itself to have 2 states, red while charging up and yellow while deploying. Okay, for real now, let's actually implement another weapon. The first one I wanted to tackle was the sniper, which kills the closest entity to the capsule. The math for this was a little annoying to get right, but it wasn't too hard to implement. The code for that looks like this. I also added an animation to the capsule so that it blinks between red and yellow when active instead of just solid yellow. After a bit of code refactoring, it was getting pretty late, so I decided to wind down for dinner. After dinner, it was about 11 PM, but I wanted to get a little more progress done. First, I changed the X-Bomb color from black to white as it was a little easier to see against certain colors. Next, I made the slimes aggro and followed the player once they got close enough. Finally, slimes one-shot you now if you touch them, so be careful with that. I wanted to take a moment before progressing to the next stage to reflect on just how much progress was made. This is what I ended with Friday night, and this is what I ended with on Saturday. Honestly, that's really incredible. Alright, time for bed. Rise and shine early Sunday morning, for real this time, as there were only 6 hours before deadline. Technically there was 2 hours of grace period, but I didn't want to have to rely on them if I could help it. The first order of business was to add a death screen. I wanted to make dying, fun? In this game, so I included the manner of death along with some flavor text specific to that manner. For example, death by X-Bomb looks like this, and death by slime looks like this. Continuing the GUI train, I needed a title screen. But to have a title screen, the game actually needs a title. Luckily I came up with a pretty good one while laying in bed for an hour the previous night. Drumroll please. Pop goes the weapon. Honestly, I'm not sure how many people are going to get this one. It's the part on Pop goes the weasel, which I think is actually a British thing. Think Jack in the Box. The title is supposed to relate to the anticipation of not knowing what weapon you're going to get. I think it works well. For the title screen itself, there's a really easy and professional looking technique you can use. Simply pan the camera slowly over the map, and when it reaches the end, fade out and fade back in on the other side. Very cool. Next I made the buttons much smaller, and added a tutorial screen to describe the basic controls and objective of the game. Nothing too fancy. And no, that's not a typo. At this point the game is in a state of mostly being complete, so it's time for my next and last game jam beginner tip. Submit early. There's nothing worse than spending 47 hours on a game only to be thwarted by issues exploiting the game or uploading to itch. It's best to take care of those issues hours before deadline. For me, my web build had a broken sound effect, and my desktop builds crashed outright. Tons of fun. Turns out I had a rogue resource in the project. After a little bit of file cleansing, all builds are now functional. At this point I had officially submitted something to the jam, so for whatever reason I couldn't submit another build, like the entire country's internet going down. All those hours of progress would not be wasted. I quickly threw together a simple score system to give you 10 points for every slime defeated. Originally I wanted to have a combo system, so you get more points for killing more slimes at once, but that's a little trick to implement, and with so little time left, I took the easy option. The next item on the list was background music. Now I wanted to make some for myself at some point, but I don't know how to do that yet. Look forward to that idea episode. Instead I used some banging music from a Creative Commons library. The link is on the itch.io page and also down in the description. At some point I also added color to the death screen to emphasize how you died. The last 2 points on the list were 2 new weapons, which at this point in the jam I only had 2 of. The first is a laser spin inspired by Chrono Trigger. I also came up with this one while laying in bed on Saturday night. I think it's pretty cool and requires more movement to dodge than the other 2. Here's a flavor text which reflects its origin. The last weapon is probably my favorite and the one I wanted since the beginning, the black hole. And surprisingly, it was straightforward to implement. It only required using Godot's animation player along with some simple linear algebra. The first iteration killed entities upon touching the black hole, but I later changed it to kill entities trapped in one satisfying blow. Needs flavor text for the death screen, probably my favorite as well. I had about an hour left, but I didn't have any other ideas that wouldn't run the risk of introducing nasty bugs. I was happy with what I had created, and I was ready to sign up for this jam. And that was a good thing too. I think the itch servers outright crashed minutes before deadline, so I hope you took my earlier advice. Fast forward to the present and the results are in. So how well did I do? Overall I placed 1074th. Honestly, I was a little disappointed and surprised by this ranking. At first glance it looked like I did worse than last year, but when you account for the increased number of submissions you get the same number. Seriously, the 4 decimal places. Points for consistency, I guess? So what went wrong? Well, nothing. People didn't dislike my game, there were just 1,000 or so other games they liked better. In fact, the comments I received throughout the rating period were all really great, including this one chap who loved it so much he wanted to see it get in the top 5. Sorry about that, mate. Maybe next year. But thanks for the kind words. Really means a lot. Honestly, I think my 2 games are best described as 2 sides of the same coin. While one doesn't have the most interesting concept, it is a finished product with 10 solid levels. And the other game has a more interesting concept, but admittedly feels a little half-baked. I guess my goal for next year will be to take the best elements from both good games to create a great game. Honestly, I am really proud of what I created, even if it didn't rank that high. Being able to be proud of something and critical enough to see its flaws is possible and an important skill. Don't let your setbacks stop you from trying, let them motivate you to try harder. So when you finally do succeed, it will be all the much sweeter.